There's a moment you've lived more times than you can count, an ordinary moment that quietly reveals something extraordinary about human psychology. You're standing in a doorway, or waiting by a table, or holding your phone and pretending to scroll, even though your eyes keep drifting toward the clock. Minutes pass, and that familiar voice inside you whispers again, softer than breath. They relate again. Maybe you try to smile because you already expected it. Maybe a small irritation curls itself into your chest. Or maybe you tell yourself, "Don't take it personally," even though a part of you already has. Because lateness chronic, repeated lateness is strange. It looks small on the surface. Just a few minutes, nothing special, nothing dramatic. Yet it feels emotional in ways that nobody ever really talks about. It feels like a tiny imbalance between two hearts. Like time itself has turned into a message. Like there's meaning hidden inside those passing minutes, even if you don't want to admit it. But here is the quiet truth most people never explore. Chronic lateness has very little to do with time and everything to do with how someone else's inner world works. Some people sprint through life like every second counts. Others move as if time is a soft blanket that will always stretch far enough. And then there are people who live in the in-between, where time feels both urgent and distant, both important and oddly unreal. Those are the people who end up running late again and again, not because they choose to, but because their entire emotional rhythm beats differently from the clock on the wall. Let us imagine one of these mornings, not the dramatic, chaotic ones, but the quiet, deceptively normal ones that happen all the time. They wake up, they check the time, they know exactly when they need to leave. And yet, as they move through their routine, something subtle happens. A thought appears. I still have time. And that single sentence becomes the opening door to everything that follows. They make coffee a little slower. They pick up their phone for what should be a quick glance. They remember a message they forgot to send yesterday. They notice something small out of place and think, "I'll fix it now. It'll take 30 seconds. But their internal clock doesn't measure reality. It measures hope. It measures optimism. It measures best-case scenarios that almost never happen in real life. To them, 5 minutes feels spacious, generous, enough. To the outside world, 5 minutes is barely 5 minutes. Psychologists sometimes call this an emotional miscalculation, a mind estimating time not by experience, but by intention, not by evidence, but by desire. They don't plan to be late. They simply believe, deeply and sincerely, that everything will fit, that today will finally be the day where nothing slows them down, where no delay appears, where the world, for once, cooperates. And then, as it always does, life adds a tiny complication. A misplaced item, a notification, a small hesitation, a moment of daydreaming, a rush of nerves, and suddenly the person is behind, even before they have fully realized it. Their awareness drifts, time slips, and then comes the jolt, the sharp breath, the sudden awareness that arrives like a cold splash. I am late. Their heartbeat speeds up, their movements turn frantic, their mind shifts from gentle optimism to full urgency, and inside them, guilt is already forming like a cloud. I didn't mean to. Why does this keep happening? Why can't I get this right? But the world doesn't see any of this. The world sees only the result, the empty chair, the ticking clock, the person standing there waiting, And even if the late person cares deeply, even if they feel terrible, lateness has a weight, a social meaning, a tiny emotional bruise on the moment. Not because the person intended harm, but because time is one of the most human currencies we have. When someone is late, even unintentionally, it can feel like a small imbalance in an unspoken exchange. But lateness is almost never disrespect. It's a symptom of pressure, of fear, of avoidance, of emotional overload, of perfectionism, of an internal rhythm that simply doesn't match the external world. Some people avoid leaving when they're anxious. Some avoid starting when they feel judged. Some get stuck in transitions because those moments drain more energy than anyone around them realizes. Some lose time inside their imagination because it feels safer than the real world. And some are simply overwhelmed by responsibilities, carrying so much on their mental plate that minutes evaporate between tasks without them noticing. Yet all of them share something in common. Their lateness is not about a lack of care. It is about the emotional world they're trying to navigate. And the more you understand this, the more the story of lateness begins to transform, not into an excuse, but into insight. Because inside every late arrival, there is a silent battle no one sees. If you slow down and look closely at people who are always late, something becomes clear. There is almost always a deeper reason behind the behavior, a psychological rhythm that others rarely notice. Some people are late because transitions exhaust them. Moving from comfort to action feels like climbing an emotional hill. They don't dislike the destination. They just struggle to shift their mind fast enough to get there. Imagine standing up from a warm blanket, leaving a quiet room, or ending a peaceful moment to step into the noise of the world. For some minds, this transition is heavier than the clock allows. Other people are late because their minds get stuck between almost done and not quite ready. They live in that fragile space where tasks seem close to completion, but never fully finished. 10 more seconds, one more adjustment, one more look in the mirror, one more review of what they're taking, one more thought they want to finish before they move. Those tiny one more moments pile up until they look at the time and realize the moment has already slipped out of their hands. And then there are the people who carry too much responsibility for too many things, balancing invisible emotional loads that no one else can see. Their lateness isn't careless. It comes from trying to hold the whole world together, from being the type of person who is always helping others, always managing crises, always giving more than they receive. They run behind not because they are doing nothing, but because they are doing everything, everywhere, for everyone. Their clock doesn't tick with minutes, it ticks with obligations. Then there's the perfectionist, the one who doesn't want to show up half-ready. They want to look composed, presentable, prepared. They adjust their hair again, change their shirt, rethink what they are bringing, double-check something small. Not because they're vain, but because being judged terrifies them. They want to be seen in their best light, and that desire, that fear costs them precious minutes. Their lateness isn't lack of effort. It is too much effort misplaced in the wrong moment. But then there's a different group entirely, the ones who are not perfectionists, avoiders or overloaded, but dreamers. These are the people whose minds wander easily. They fall into thoughts, into possibilities, into ideas that pull them away from time. They think in scenes, in emotions, in creativity. Time becomes fog around them, something that exists, but not something that binds them the way it binds others. They are absorbed, immersed, floating between imagination and reality. They look up at the clock and see 10 minutes left, and to them, 10 minutes is a world, a canvas, enough time to finish one more thought. But the world does not move at the pace of their imagination. And so, once again, they find themselves running behind. And yet, and this is where many people misunderstand lateness, these late individuals are often the same ones who are emotionally present in ways others are not. They listen deeply, they care intensely, they show up for the big moments, the painful moments, the vulnerable moments. They may struggle with the clock, but they don't struggle with love, or loyalty, or empathy. Their punctuality is not a reflection of their heart, it's a reflection of their rhythm. Still, lateness hurts others, not because of intention, but because of perception. Waiting can feel like an emotional sting, a sense of imbalance, a hint of perhaps I am not important enough. That's why lateness is so sensitive. It touches the quiet parts of our insecurities. The late person feels guilty and overwhelmed. The waiting person feels undervalued, and neither side fully understands the other. But here's the layer nobody talks about. Lateness often begins long before the clock says someone is late. It begins with a thought. I don't want to leave yet. A feeling. This moment feels better than the next one. A fear. What if the situation I'm walking into is uncomfortable? A pressure. I have too much to do and not enough of me to spread around. A habit. I always think I can do more in less time. A hope. Today will be different. And then the cycle starts again. For some people, lateness is tied to their childhood. Maybe time didn't matter much where they grew up. Maybe schedules were soft. Maybe chaos was normal, and punctuality was never taught, never valued, never modeled. So as adults, they don't experience minutes with the same sharpness others do. Time feels fluid, bendable, something that adapts to them, not something they must adapt to. And for others, lateness comes from the opposite environment, from households where time was rigid, strict, demanding, where being late meant punishment, where every second was monitored and every delay was criticized. And so, as adults, they create space for themselves in the only way they can, by stretching moments, taking their time, resisting control. Not loudly, not rebelliously, but quietly, softly, by dragging their feet just enough to feel like they own the moment. This subtle rebellion often looks like irresponsibility from the outside, but inside, it feels like reclaiming freedom. Time becomes a boundary, a private form of resistance no one else notices. And then there are the people who are late because they are afraid of arriving early. This is surprisingly common. To them, being early feels uncomfortable. It feels like waiting awkwardly, like standing alone, like having nothing to do, like being overly eager. They prefer to time their arrival perfectly. But perfection is fragile. All it takes is one small delay, a misplaced object, a moment of hesitation, a surge of anxiety, and the timing collapses. What was meant to be perfect becomes late. And these individuals rarely talk about this fear, because it feels silly to admit. I didn't want to be early, but it's real, and it shapes them far more than anyone realizes. Lateness, then, becomes a mix of emotional needs, the need for comfort, the need for control, the need for escape, the need for reassurance, the need for more time than life gives them, the need to stretch the present before entering the unknown. It is never as simple as, they don't care. Because most chronic late individuals care deeply, so deeply that their emotions, fears, and hopes bend time around them. If you pay close attention, you'll notice that chronically late people live inside a very specific emotional loop, one built not on carelessness, but on micro-optimism. It sounds like this. This one tea take long. I can finish this quickly. I'll leave in 5 minutes. Traffic probably want to be bad today. I'll definitely make it on time. This time will be different. Each belief feels small on its own, but together they create a rhythm, a hopeful, unrealistic rhythm that collapses the moment life adds even the tiniest obstacle. Their hope is sincere. Their intention is kind. But the world does not move at the speed of their optimism, and when optimism meets reality, lateness is born. But the most misunderstood part comes after the moment they finally realize they relate. For some people, this realization hits like a physical sensation, a tightening in the chest, a rush of adrenaline, a sudden urgency that feels almost like fear. They move faster, their thoughts speed up, their breathing changes, and inside them, guilt begins forming instantly. I can believe I did this again. They're going to be mad. Why didn't I leave earlier? I need to do better next time. This internal storm happens every time, and yet the outside world sees none of it. From the outside, it looks simple. They relate, you're waiting, that's all. But internally, lateness is often tied to self-criticism. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind that settles into the mind like fog. The kind that whispers, you're failing at something simple. Everyone else can manage this. Why can't you? You're letting people down. This guilt can follow them into the car, into the hallway, into the moment they finally walk in and say, I am so sorry. But beneath the apology, there is often a deeper emotion, exhaustion. Because living in a cycle of lateness isn't a relaxing, it's draining. It is a constant emotional sprint, always trying to catch up, always feeling a few steps behind, always wishing they could be better than they are. And here is the painful irony. People who are chronically late often have incredible dedication in other areas of life. They stay up late helping friends. They answer messages at any hour. They offer emotional support that goes far beyond what is asked. They remember birthdays, anniversaries, fears, dreams. They show up for others when it truly matters. They are not unreliable in the ways that count the most. But the world judges punctuality more quickly than it recognizes emotional loyalty. It's not fair, but it's real. Still, lateness creates tension in relationships. Not because the late person doesn't care, but because the waiting person feels something they don't want to admit. I feel unimportant. I feel dismissed. I feel like you chose something else over me. Time is emotional. And waiting amplifies insecurities people try hard to hide. But here's the twist that most never consider. Chronically late people are rarely late to things that comfort them. They relate to things that feel emotionally heavy. A stressful meeting, a conversation they're nervous about, a social event that drains them, a task where they fear being judged, a situation where they're unsure of themselves. They delay the things that trigger the mind, the things that activate fear, uncertainty, pressure. Even if the event is good, if it carries emotional weight, they hesitate. This hesitation is not laziness. It is a psychological form of protection, a soft shield between them and the moment they are afraid to enter. Their mind says, "Give me just a little more time before I face this. Let me feel ready. Let me breathe." Those few extra minutes feel necessary, but they quietly become lateness, not rebellion, not disrespect, just a coping mechanism that others rarely recognize. Another hidden truth is this: some people delay the moment of arrival because they fear being seen, not seen physically, seen emotionally. Walking into a room, having attention turned toward them, facing expectations, being noticed, being judged, being evaluated. These fears are subtle but powerful. They create emotional friction around the simple act of showing up. So the person delays, not consciously, not deliberately, but instinctively. Time becomes a buffer between them and the moment they are trying to prepare for. Even arriving early feels uncomfortable for them. It feels like vulnerability, like being exposed, like standing in a spotlight they didn't choose. So they aim for the perfect arrival right on time. But perfection is fragile, and the slightest delay tips them into lateness. Their mind seeks safety, but safety costs time, and time doesn't bend for them the way they wish it would. Another piece of this puzzle is emotional overload. People who carry many worries, many responsibilities, many internal battles tend to lose track of time more easily. Their thoughts move too fast, too heavily, too constantly. When your mind is juggling 15 things at once, 5 minutes can vanish without you realizing it. This is not intentional. It is neurological. Cognitive overload blurs the passage of time. Stress accelerates it. Anxious thinking absorbs it. Internal noise replaces awareness of the outside world. Minutes disappear because the mind is full. And then there's something deeper, still something people rarely admit even to themselves. Some chronically late individuals feel unworthy of showing up on time. If they doubt their value, their contributions, their presence, they subconsciously assume their timing doesn't matter much anyway. This is not conscious thinking. It is emotional residue. They underestimate their importance, so they underestimate the importance of their time. Again, not because they don't care, but because they care so deeply that it hurts. All of these emotional roots create a single experience. Time becomes blurred, bent, distorted. The clock may be strict, but their inner world is not. And until someone understands their internal world, they cannot align themselves with external time. But everything begins to shift gently, slowly, subtly when they start noticing their patterns. The moment they ask themselves, "What is happening emotionally when I am supposed to leave? What feeling am I trying to avoid? What comfort am I trying to hold on to? What fear am I delaying? What pressure am I escaping? What hope is making me believe I have more time than I actually do?" That self-awareness is the very beginning of change. Not perfection, not immediate discipline. Awareness. Because lateness is not a problem to punish, it is a message to decode. Something powerful happens the moment a chronically late person begins to examine their own patterns. Not with shame, not with frustration, but with genuine curiosity. They start noticing the very first moments where time slips the invisible cracks, where minutes quietly escape before they even realize it. For many, the real problem isn't the last 5 minutes before they leave. It is the emotional tension that begins much earlier. they begin to see that lateness isn't a sudden event. It's a gradual drift, a series of tiny emotional decisions that slowly pull them away from the clock. It looks like this: a hesitation, a distraction, a moment of internal negotiation, a desire to finish just one more thing, a need for comfort before facing discomfort, a moment of silence before stepping into noise, a delay before facing pressure, a small emotional exhale before entering the world again. Each of these moments feels harmless, but together they form a path that leads directly to being late. Once someone becomes aware of this pattern, they begin to understand something essential. Their lateness isn't a failure of discipline. It is a form of emotional friction. They realize that transitions from rest to movement, from alone to social, from comfort to uncertainty, are emotionally heavier for them than for others. Not wrong, not broken, just heavier. They start to recognize that their mind is not working against them. It's trying to protect them from discomfort, from overwhelm, from judgment, from unfinished emotions, from the pressure of being on before they re-ready. And then something subtle yet important shifts inside them. Instead of asking, "Why can TI be on time like everyone else?" they begin asking, "What part of me is struggling right now?" This shift changes everything, because lateness at its root is not about the clock. It's about how someone's inner world clashes with the outer world's timing. Once they see that clearly, they stop trying to force themselves to be punctual through shame. They stop saying things like, "I need to try harder. I am so stupid for being late. I always mess this up. I am useless with time." Shame has never fixed lateness. It only deepens the emotional resistance that created it in the first place. Instead, they begin to make adjustments rooted in self-awareness. Small, gentle adjustments, but powerful ones. They start preparing a few minutes earlier, not because they are panicking, but because they know transitions drain them emotionally. They give themselves more time than they think they need, not because they're weak, but because their inner world works differently. They begin reducing last-minute tasks, not because they're lazy, but because they know those tasks swallow minutes without mercy. They start saying no to commitments they know will overload them, not because they're unreliable, but because they're finally respecting their limits. These changes don't come from force. They come from understanding. And with that understanding, they begin to see something else. Lateness has always been an emotional signal, not a character flaw. They begin recognizing the moments where they are most likely to be late. They relate when they feel anxious. They relate when they feel overwhelmed. They relate when they feel unprepared. They relate when they fear judgment. They relate when they're avoiding discomfort. They relate when they've taken on too much. They relate when they're mentally tired. They relate when they're emotionally scattered. They relate when their hope outweighs reality. And they realize that their lateness doesn't happen randomly. It happens predictably, once you understand the emotional triggers behind it. There's another revelation that often comes during this stage. Many chronically late people are incredibly reliable in ways that have nothing to do with time. They are the ones who sit with you during hard moments, the ones who answer late-night messages, the ones who remember the details no one else remembers, the ones who show up for emotional emergencies, the ones who stay longer, care deeper, love harder. Their heart is dependable, even if their timing isn't tea. But the world doesn't measure love in minutes. It measures punctuality in seconds. And this mismatch creates pain on both sides. The waiting person feels dismissed. The late person feels misunderstood. And in that tiny space between those feelings, relationships get strained, trust gets tested, patience gets weighed. But now, with awareness, the late person begins to see the emotional cost of their pattern, not the punishment, not the guilt, but the real emotional impact. People feel forgotten. People feel unimportant. People feel like they are not a priority. People feel like their time is being taken. And for someone who is deeply caring, this realization hurts. It's not the clock that stings them. It's the idea that their actions may be hurting others, even if unintentionally. This is often the turning point. Not shame, not fear, but empathy. Because once they understand the emotional root of their lateness and the emotional effect it has on others, change becomes possible. Not overnight, not perfectly, but slowly, naturally, gently. They begin working with their emotional rhythm instead of fighting it. They start recognizing the exact moments where time begins to slip. The pause before getting up. The extra glance at their phone. The urge to fix something quickly. The thought of wanting a little more space. The small desire to delay discomfort. The tiny hope that everything will magically go smoother today. These small moments were invisible before. Now they become signals, opportunities for conscious choice. And that awareness begins to rewrite their relationship with time. Not through discipline, through clarity, not through force, through understanding, not through shame, through self-compassion. Because lateness is not cured by alarms, checklists, or harsh self-talk. It's transformed through emotional insight. And once a person understands their inner timing, the real timing, the emotional timing, the rest of life slowly begins to shift with them. Once someone becomes aware of their own emotional patterns around time, something subtle but transformative begins to happen. They start noticing the exact moments where their relationship with time bends, not just when they are already late, but far earlier, in the unseen emotional space where lateness is born. They begin to observe themselves in real time. For the first time, they notice the hesitation in their body when it's time to leave. They notice the small sigh, the internal pause, the quiet reluctance to transition from one state to another. They notice how their shoulders tighten when they think about where they're going. They notice how their thoughts spike when they imagine being judged, expected, evaluated. They notice how their mind clings to the last comforting moment before they step into uncertainty. Suddenly, what used to feel automatic becomes visible, and once something becomes visible, it can be understood. One of the first realizations many late individuals have is this: I am not late because I don't care. I am late because certain emotional moments are hard for me. That realization alone brings relief, because it untangles lateness from identity. It becomes a pattern, not a flaw, a habit, not a failure, a psychological rhythm, not a moral defect. And with that clarity, they begin to uncover more. They start to see that the last 10 minutes before leaving are a fragile time, a time where their mind becomes vulnerable to distraction, avoidance, hope, anxiety, and emotional drift. They begin to understand that their internal voice, telling them, "You have time," isn't a fact, it is a coping strategy. A way their mind protects them from stress. They realize that their optimism, while soft and beautiful, has been rearranging time to comfort them, not to prepare them. They begin to see something else too. When they feel stressed, time speeds up. When they feel comfort, time slows down. When they feel overwhelmed, time disappears completely. Time becomes emotional, not objective, not stable, not external. It becomes shaped by the nervous system. This understanding leads them to another important truth. Their sense of time is not broken. It is responsive. It responds to fear. It responds to hope. It responds to pressure. It responds to insecurity. It responds to emotional overload. It responds to internal conflict. Their lateness is not a random flaw. It is a reflection of how deeply their emotions influence their perception of time. And as they learn this, they also see something painful. Their lateness has been hurting people they love, not because they wanted to, but because their inner struggles were invisible from the outside. This creates a moment of honesty inside them, a moment they've avoided for years. I didn't mean to make you feel unimportant. I wasn't choosing something over you. I was wrestling with myself before I even got to you. And that realization becomes the bridge, the connection between their inner chaos and the outer world. From this point, change becomes possible in a new way. They start to notice their impulses, the one more minute impulse, the I can finish this quickly impulse, the I don't want to leave yet impulse, the I need to feel ready impulse, the maybe if I wait, I'll feel better impulse. They begin to understand that these impulses have emotional roots, and emotional roots can be reshaped. They start creating small pauses of awareness. Why am I hesitating? What am I afraid of right now? What feeling am I trying to avoid? What discomfort am I delaying? What pressure am I postponing? These moments of awareness don't look dramatic from the outside. There's no big shift, no huge revelation, no overnight transformation. But internally, something huge has changed. The person is no longer sleepwalking through their lateness. They re-watching it, understanding it, mapping it. And understanding is the beginning of mastery. They begin to identify their emotional triggers. They rush most when they fear disappointment. They delay most when they feel insecure. They drift most when they are overwhelmed. They lose time when they are trying too hard to be perfect. They sink into thought when something is worrying them. They cling to comfort when something ahead feels threatening. They optimize unrealistically when they were trying to impress. They procrastinate when they're emotionally tired. This self-observation becomes a powerful mirror. And as they continue looking into that mirror, they begin to see yet another truth. Lateness is rarely about the event they're going to. It's about the emotional state they were leaving behind. If they are leaving, comfort, safety, warmth, peace, solitude, focus, control, or familiarity, their mind tries to hold on to it for just a little longer. Not because they don't want to show up, but because their nervous system isn't ready to let go. This understanding leads them into the next phase of change, learning how to regulate their internal state before transitions. They begin practicing small shifts, taking a breath before moving, acknowledging the emotion instead of avoiding it, recognizing the discomfort instead of trying to outrun it, preparing to leave 10 minutes earlier and allowing those 10 minutes to be emotional space, not rushing, not pushing, just transitioning gently. For the first time, they are aligning their emotional world with their physical timing. And slowly, they begin to experience something new. They leave their home without panic. They arrive without breathlessness. They show up without shame. They feel present instead of flustered. They feel grounded instead of scattered. These moments feel small, but they are monumental because they aren't forcing punctuality anymore. They are creating emotional alignment. And that is the true solution to lateness. Not alarms, not stricter schedules, not more guilt, not self-punishment, but alignment, a rhythm between emotion and time, a cooperation between feelings and moments, a harmony between the inner world and the outer one. And once a person experiences this harmony, even once that gentle, quiet sense of arriving without chaos, they crave it. Not because it makes others happy, but because it makes them feel whole. They realize something profound. Being on time isn't about pleasing people. It is about living without emotional exhaustion. They begin to understand that time is not their enemy, not their judge, not their burden. Time becomes something else entirely. A partner, a guide, a gentle boundary, a steady rhythm, a space where they can exist without rushing. For the first time in their life, time stops being something they are constantly chasing and becomes something they can walk beside. As someone begins to understand the emotional meaning behind their lateness, a quiet transformation takes place, one that does not happen with alarms, strict rules, or self-punishment, but with awareness. They start to see the truth. Lateness was never about being careless. It was about being overwhelmed. It was never about disrespect. It was about emotional protection. It was never about not valuing others. It was about not knowing how to navigate their own inner world. And once this understanding settles in, something in them softens. They stop fighting time as if it were an enemy. They stop running behind themselves. They stop apologizing for who they are. And they begin to build a different relationship with themselves, with time, with the people they care about. They begin noticing the exact emotional signals that once made them drift. The moment avoidance whispers, "Stay just a little longer." The moment perfectionism insists, "You are not ready yet." The moment fear suggests, "What if they judge you when you arrive?" The moment overwhelm says, "You can't go yet. Your mind isn't settled." The moment hope promises, "You have more time than you think." But instead of letting these whispers guide them, they gently respond to them. "I hear you, but I don't need to run anymore." They begin preparing earlier, not out of panic, but out of compassion for their future self. They begin leaving small emotional buffers not to please anyone, but to move at a pace that doesn't drain them. They begin respecting their own capacity, not forcing themselves to do one last task, not squeezing their day until it snaps. They begin recognizing that their nervous system deserves kindness too. For the first time in their life, they allow themselves to live without hurry, without guilt, without the constant sensation of catching up. And slowly, life shifts. The door they used to rush through becomes a calm exit. The walk they used to panic through becomes steady. The arrival they used to dread becomes peaceful. The apology they prepared in their mind becomes unnecessary. Not because they changed who they are, but because they finally understood who they are. Understanding becomes their anchor. Presence becomes their rhythm. Compassion becomes their guide. And time, that thing that once felt slippery, stressful, uncontrollable, becomes something else entirely. It becomes breathable, manageable, predictable, human. Something they move with, not against. they begin to realize something profound. They were never bad with time. They were simply living in emotional rhythms that had never been named. Rhythms shaped by childhood, by pressure, by overwhelm, by fear, by hope, by their sensitive mind trying to create comfort in a world that demanded speed. And now, with awareness, they can move differently. Not perfectly, not rigidly, not flawlessly, but gently, intentionally, aligned. The people around them begin to notice the shift too, not just in their punctuality, but in their presence. They show up calmer. They show up more grounded. They show up without chaos. And perhaps most importantly, they show up fully physically and emotionally. Because when someone understands their relationship with time, they don't just arrive on time. They arrive as themselves, complete, balanced, steady, authentic. And that is far more meaningful than any clock could measure. Because in the end, lateness was never just about minutes. It was about self-awareness. It was about emotional honesty. It was about learning to understand the invisible weight they carried through every transition in life. And now, that weight is lighter. The fog is clearer. The rhythm is softer. The journey is simpler. They are no longer running behind life. They are walking with it, step by step, moment by moment, at a pace that finally feels like their own.